Okay, next news story. Nintendo continues to release its Creator Voices video, where essentially we get a bit more of a deep dive into some of the Switch 2 third-party games that are coming out. And this week we were blessed with a Final Fantasy VII Remake feature and more footage of Final Fantasy VII Remake on Switch 2, which is always welcome. We can add that to the stuff that we saw at the Nintendo Direct. And Oliver, at the risk of upsetting the internet again, you've done you've done a comparison between the footage that we saw in this creator's voice video and the PlayStation 5 version running in performance mode. I've had a look at this head-to-head. I've got to say, this Switch 2 version actually looks really, really good in terms of the visual feature set. But tell me more about your thoughts there.
Yes, so a couple days ago, Nintendo released a 3-minute video of Naoki Hamaguchi, who I believe is the game director for the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake on Nintendo Switch 2, and it had about 1.5 minutes of remake footage, again, presumably taken from Switch 2, although we'll touch on that in a moment. And I was able to match about 1 minute of it or so on PS5, because a lot of it was taken from the early game there. The last time we talked about Final Fantasy VII Remake on Switch 2, some punters in the peanut gallery pointed out that maybe I should have compared the game on Switch 2 to PS5 because it is the integrated version, has the integrated lighting changes. So I thought that was, a fair point. And maybe this time I would take a look at the integrated version instead of PS4. So I did PS5 in performance mode. That seemed fairest to me because, native 4K with the quality mode seemed a bit extreme for these comparisons. So that's important to note. But of course, the Switch 2 is targeting 30 FPS here, not 60 FPS, as is the case on PlayStation 5. So if we look at the first set of shots here, the primary difference, and this will be a repeated point, is that the Switch 2 is blurrier than the PS5. There's a difference in image clarity. So it's harder to make out fine texture details. In terms of the metrics, I counted out a few shots on Switch 2, and it renders at 1080p, it looks like quite consistently with no particular signs of upsampling nor any particular signs of like DLSS or anything like that. I think this just looks like the regular TAA. The PS5 obviously is at 1512p with TAA, and it looks a lot sharper in these stills. But of course, one thing you have to consider here is the Switch 2 footage is coming from a YouTube rip. Unfortunately, they did not supply a high quality press asset, so maybe it fares a little bit better if we actually had those high quality assets, although I am looking mostly at very stationary shots, so it shouldn't be too bad there. Another issue is that the hair is heavily dithered in both versions and is basically relying on the TA to clean it up and make it look presentable over time. On PS5, it looks pretty okay. And at 4K on PS5, it looks very clean, I think, actually quite clean. But on Switch, it's rougher here and not as elegant. And it looks okay, but it's a little bit more messy, more like base PS4 there. The depth of field is also shallower in these cutscene shots on Switch, which is maybe a side effect of the resolution difference. Sometimes that scales based on resolution. And as we go through the shots, that's basically the story. Differences in depth of field and in the hair rendering, quality of hair rendering, and then less clarity on Switch 2. But not altogether a bad looking result. It looks pretty good. This last shot has a bit more of a meaningful difference. The shot of the tower there, the Mako Tower, insofar as the smoke is a bit more prominent on Switch, but again, just a little quirk. I don't think it means anything. There's also a bit of pre-rendered video that they showed off here, which is not too surprising. It looks very, very similar on both platforms, so chalk that up as a big win for Switch. No, but it's 1080p 30 video, it looks like, on both platforms, so nothing exceptional there.
Yeah.
But there is one last shot that I do think we need to talk about that is exceptional relative to these other shots, and that's that classic opening shot of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the camera pans from Barret to Cloud, and he jumps off the train and kind of stands up and sheaths his sword behind him. Very iconic shot, very important
Cool
shot.
guy.
Maybe the key shot of that game, right? Very cool shot. That's running at 60 FPS for some reason in this footage. So I saw a lot of people online, and even Alex initially say it looks like they got a 60 FPS mode, and this immediately piqued my curiosity. So I had to download this trailer and see what was going on. And it became pretty evident that this is not Switch 2. Because if we pause right at the end of that shot and look at Cloud's hair in the still frame, it's much cleaner on the alleged Switch 2 than PS5 in performance mode. Well, it's targeting the same 60 FPS. So that doesn't make much sense to me. I strongly suspect that's not Switch 2. In real time, it's not. It's probably PC footage, is my guess, based on how it looks. It's probably high resolution PC footage. I don't think that's Switch 2. And I don't think there is I think this game is probably just going to have a 30 FPS mode, maybe a 40 FPS mode. I don't think it's going to have a 60 FPS mode. I don't think it will, just because the graphics would be downgraded to a degree that I don't think that Square Enix would want to ship that. But overall, I think this is a really good showing. It's a last-gen game running with some upgrades on PS5, not gigantic upgrades, but some upgrades to lighting, some stylistic and changes to the volumetrics and things like that are quite nice. And it's running at 1080p 30, which is, not that great relative to PS5 at 1512p 60, not that you would expect it to be, but it's pretty solid relative to PS4, which was also 1080p 30. Again, just preliminary, we have to see the whole game, of course, but this is, so far, looks pretty decent. Another decent showing for Switch 2 with kind of in that mix with PS4, but also showing, some favorable aspects here in regards to that lighting presentation. As an aside, I did scrounge up a little bit of capture from PS4 as well. And in this shot in the bar, you can see that the Seventh Heaven blackboard is substantially lower resolution on PS4. So it does look like, at least in some areas, we are seeing some of that high resolution art from Intergrade. But to see if that carries across the entire game and all of its texture assets, all of its upgraded texture assets, we'll have to wait for the final game to see. The only caveat is that this is running with poor frame pacing. That was also the case with the earlier showing, which put through our tools. And it was also the case with Crisis Core Reunion a few years back, which was also an Unreal-based game. So they really need to use a different FPS capping method than the one that's built into Unreal, which was presumably the one they're using. Please, this really needs to be fixed. I'm going to be really upset if this isn't fixed. But now the one caveat here, of course, is that on a G-Sync panel in portable mode, this should be fine, right? Hopefully.
Should be fine.
Should be fine, hopefully. But in dock play, potentially without VRR there, not fine, right? Probably not fine. So that's the only caveat here. Performance needs to be fixed. Visuals, though, I think looks great. This is presumably all docked footage, of course. Portable mode, maybe we're getting a cut down to, 720p, 648p, something in that range. But I imagine on that screen, scaled up, it'll probably still look pretty good as well. And that would be, an experience that's probably broadly comparable to what you get on like a Steam Deck at 30 FPS. That would probably be a pretty good experience there in portable mode, potentially. So yeah, I'm pretty satisfied by this overall, and I think it's a good showing for Switch 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I've got your feeds here. I've actually just synchronized them on Premiere Timeline, and I think overall it looks fantastic. If you've got the feature set by and large of the PlayStation 5 performance mode running at 1080p 30 on a resource-constrained device like the Switch 2, I think that's a major win. I also understand from that video that it looks like they're intent on bringing the whole remake trilogy to Switch 2, right, Oliver?
Yes, that's the other aspect of this. And now, this is very promising in some respects. Obviously, porting FF7 Rebirth would be harder than this game. I imagine quite a bit harder. It's using more advanced features. It has this big open world. It stresses out even PS5 hardware to a considerable degree. If you don't believe me, just look at the image quality in the pop-in. That base PS5 version. It's not so good. Yeah. It's not so good. But I'm actually more curious about what this means for the broader series, because, you got an FF7R game coming up, FF7 Reunion possibly, which is just my guess on the name, but FF7R something, right? And presumably that game is now penciled in for Switch 2. Does that mean they're going to continue with UE4, instead of switching to UE5? Because maybe you would not want to commit to a Switch 2 port of that game if you did not feel 100% confident, even, implied port to Switch 2, if you couldn't get Unreal Engine 5 running in a competitive form on Switch 2, right? Which we don't have solid visual evidence of so far in the games that we've surveyed. Perhaps you can cut it a bit, but can you cut it far enough while still looking decent? That's kind of a question. And then also, the Final Fantasy VII producers were talking about, we want to get the next game out quickly, and we're interested in adopting UE5 if it helps with that effort, but you'd think, well, if you're switching engines, it would get more slow. So again, there are a few factors that maybe point you in the direction of UE4 being a more prominent possibility there relative to UE5 for that next generation effort, for that next title, which is probably coming out in the next 3 or 4 years there. But personally, I'm hoping they do adopt UE5 despite that, just because it would fix like the horrible pop-in issues that afflict Rebirth.
Right.
It would fix the poor indirect lighting. It would fix the poor shadow map quality. UE5 solves so
Shadow
many
map
rendering
quality.
issues that game has. It's like unbelievable, even though it's not obviously well suited for an open world title. It's like purpose built almost to fix every problem in Rebirth from a rendering perspective. If the trade-off is only, you know, that it runs at 30 FPS or 40 FPS and that it doesn't maybe appear on Switch 2, or it appears on Switch 2 in a very degraded form, I'm personally fine with that. I kind of want the series to end on a graphical high point, to be a really special visual experience, and I don't think UE4 is going to give that to you at the moment, given what they achieved with Rebirth. Because I thought Rebirth was kind of a visual disappointment. Like, there's some really great high points with the cutscenes, but oh man, that open world did not look so flattering, even relative to the prior series entries. So that's my only thought, is that maybe this has some implication for what they'll do with the third game, even though I am hoping it is UE5, to the chagrin of people who would like a more stable experience, especially on PC and 60 FPS and whatnot. But yeah, that's one other detail. But I think it is cool, you know, they're committing to bringing this game to more players. I'm really excited to check this out. I'll be excited to check out Rebirth when that comes out, and possibly the third game in that series when it comes out on Switch too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anything to add to that, Alex?
I'm curious about what developers are going to do about these games that run at 1080p in dock mode. If they're going to be doing 4K HUDs at all, or 1080p just rendering and then 1080p and let the console upscale it. Because I think maybe the Switch's memory actually would allow, and a lot of engines do allow for, you know, the double, triple scale internal, you know, where it's like rendered everything out, then do the HUD afterward. And a lot of these, honestly, a lot of Japanese games do not use diegetic HUDs. It's pretty rare to actually see that. Potentially probably because they actually have to constantly be changing the character set really easily for all the other markets the game is brought into. So I think it actually probably would benefit a game like this quite a bit to have a 4K HUD for all like the damage, etc., and then, you know, run the game at 1080p, because otherwise I think even on a modern set, 1080p just flat upscaled wouldn't be too hot for the docked experience. So I would hope devs consider that. Maybe they will.